Every morning, Claire's day began long before the sun rose, and the quiet stillness of the house was her only companion. She moved through the motions with practiced ease, preparing breakfast for her husband, James, and their two children, Emma and Lucas. The smells of sizzling eggs and fresh coffee filled the air, a comforting routine she had perfected over the years. James preferred his eggs scrambled, Emma loved her pancakes with a touch of syrup, and Lucas insisted on toast with just a hint of peanut butter. As Claire placed the plates on the table, she glanced at James, hoping for even the briefest acknowledgement of her effort. Instead, he sat absorbed in his phone, muttering, "Next time. Don't overcook the eggs." He didn't even glance up. The words, cold and indifferent, pierced through the warm silence of the morning. Claire's hand lingered on the edge of the table, her chest tightening with a familiar ache she couldn't shake. Across from her, Emma and Lucas exchanged uncertain looks, their small faces mirroring the unease that had settled in the room. In an attempt to diffuse the tension, Emma, just 9 years old, began chattering about her school project, her voice bright but brittle. Yet, the unease lingered like an uninvited guest. James drained his coffee and rose abruptly. "Busy day ahead," he said, his words barely brushing past her. Without a goodbye, he grabbed his briefcase and walked out, leaving Claire staring at the door. Her gaze fell to the kitchen window, where the morning sun spilled across the sink. For a moment, she stood motionless, hands resting on the counter, her reflection in the glass a shadow of the woman she once knew. Claire's mornings were always busy, but today, the weight of James's indifference felt heavier. As she turned back to her children, she forced a smile, determined not to let them see the growing storm inside her. Later that morning, Claire stood by the kitchen sink, staring blankly at the soapy water as the sound of the running faucet filled the air. The gentle sunlight streaming through the window did little to warm the cold ache in her chest. James's comment about the eggs wasn't the first time his words had stung. It was one in a long line of dismissive remarks that had accumulated over the years. She dried her hands slowly, trying to brush off the thought, but the memory lingered like a stubborn shadow. When had things changed between them? There was a time when James would kiss her on the forehead before heading to work, a time when her efforts were met with gratitude and warmth. Those moments now felt like relics of another lifetime, buried beneath years of indifference. It wasn't just the words he said, it was the way he said them, dismissive, cold, as though she were merely a fixture in his routine, a provider of meals, a keeper of the house. The love and partnership they once shared had been replaced by a hollow dynamic that left her feeling more like a ghost than a wife. Determined to shake off the heavy thoughts, Claire turned her focus to the day ahead. She picked up her planner and began jotting down her to-do list. Groceries, laundry, Emma's science project supplies, and Lucas's soccer cleats. But even as she wrote, her mind wandered back to the morning's events. When Lucas walked into the kitchen to grab a snack, he paused, watching her. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked softly, his brown eyes full of concern. Claire blinked, startled by his question. Forcing a smile, she said, "Of course, sweetie. Just a little tired." But Lucas didn't look convinced. The tension between Claire and James came to a head 2 weeks later at a dinner party James hosted for his colleagues. Claire had spent the entire day preparing, meticulously cleaning the house and cooking dishes she knew would impress. She even wore a new dress, hoping that perhaps tonight, James would see her, not just as the homemaker but as the woman he had once fallen in love with. The evening started smoothly, with polite laughter and the clinking of wine glasses filling the air. James was in his element, entertaining his guests with stories of his accomplishments at work. Claire smiled along, refilling glasses and ensuring everyone had what they needed. It was during the main course when one of James's colleagues, a sharp-dressed woman named Vanessa, turned to Claire with a kind smile. "So, Claire, what do?" she asked. Claire opened her mouth to respond, but James interjected before she could speak. "She's a homemaker," he said with a dismissive chuckle. "Keeps the house running while I handle the important stuff." The room filled with light laughter, but to Claire, the words felt like a slap. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, and she forced a tight smile, hoping no one noticed the hurt in her eyes. Vanessa, perhaps sensing the sting of James's words, quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. Claire excused herself, retreating to the kitchen under the pretense of checking on dessert. There, leaning against the counter, she gripped the edge of the sink, her breaths shallow. The evening dragged on, each polite interaction with the guests feeling like a chore. When the last guest finally left, Claire turned to James, her voice trembling. "Why would you say something like that?" she asked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. James shrugged, loosening his tie. "It's not a big deal, Claire. You're being too sensitive." His indifference was the final straw. Claire turned away, biting the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. That night, as James snored softly beside her, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The humiliation, the indifference, the years of neglect, they all weighed on her like a heavy stone. For the first time, she began to wonder if this was the life she wanted. Was it worth sacrificing her dignity and happiness for the sake of holding her family together? The thought terrified her, but she couldn't ignore it any longer. The days after the dinner party felt like walking through a fog. Claire's every action was mechanical, making the beds, folding laundry, packing lunches, all while carrying the weight of an invisible burden. Each interaction with James felt colder, more detached, like two strangers occupying the same house. The once vibrant connection they shared had withered, replaced by a rigid routine where words were exchanged only out of necessity. One evening, as Claire tucked Lucas into bed, he looked up at her with his innocent, curious eyes. "Mom, why does Dad always talk like you're not there?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question struck Claire like a thunderbolt. Her hand froze on the blanket she was adjusting. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lucas shrugged, looking away. "He talks to you like you're not important. Like you don't matter." Claire felt her chest tighten, the truth in Lucas's words cutting deeper than anything James had ever said. "You matter to me, Lucas," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "And don't you ever forget that." She left his room and walked to the kitchen, where she stood staring at the empty table. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Slowly, Claire sat down, pulling a blank sheet of paper toward her. Her hand hovered over it as thoughts swirled in her mind. For years, she had endured James's dismissiveness, believing it was her duty to keep the family together at all costs. But Lucas's words echoed in her ears, forcing her to confront a painful truth. Staying wasn't just hurting her. It was teaching her children that it was okay to settle for less than they deserved. Finally, the dam broke. With tears streaming down her face, Claire began to write. Each word felt like a piece of her heart laid bare. "I can't do this anymore," she wrote. "I've given everything I have, but it's never enough. I won't disappear into the background any longer." She placed the note on the kitchen counter, along with her wedding ring. Then, with trembling hands, she packed a small bag. Before leaving, she paused by the children's rooms, her heart aching as she whispered a soft goodnight. The door clicked softly behind her as she stepped into the cool night air. For the first time in years, Claire felt a sliver of freedom, tinged with fear, but also with the faintest hint of hope. The next morning, James woke to an unusual stillness. Normally, the comforting smell of breakfast greeted him as Claire bustled around the kitchen, preparing for the day. But today, the house felt eerily silent. Frowning, he walked into the kitchen, expecting to see Claire at the stove. Instead, he found only a folded piece of paper on the counter. His stomach sank as his eyes fell on her wedding ring beside it. Slowly, he unfolded the note. As he read her words, his initial reaction was disbelief. "I can't do this anymore. I've felt invisible for years, and I can't stay in a home where I don't matter." James shook his head, muttering under his breath. "She's just upset. She'll be back." He tossed the note aside, unwilling to acknowledge its deeper meaning. But as the morning went on, the weight of Claire's absence grew heavier. The children noticed immediately. "Where's Mom?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "She needed a break," James replied, avoiding her gaze. But even as he said it, the truth gnawed at him. He had seen the pain in Claire's eyes the night of the dinner party, the sadness that had lingered long before that. That evening, James sat alone at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair where Claire always sat. For the first time, he began to feel the cracks in the foundation of their home. The laundry was piling up, the kitchen was a mess, and the children's usual chatter had been replaced with a heavy silence. The realization came slowly, like a rising tide. Claire's absence wasn't just physical. It was the absence of her care, her effort, her presence in every corner of their lives. Without her, the home felt hollow, like a structure stripped of its foundation. When James tucked Lucas into bed that night, he found the boy clutching a crumpled drawing. "I made this for Mom," Lucas said, tears streaming down his face. "Why won't she come back?" James knelt beside him, his heart aching in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I don't know," he admitted softly, "but I promise I'll try to make things right." For the first time, James began to see the full extent of what he had lost. Claire wasn't just his wife. She was the heart of their home, the thread that held their family together. And now, that thread had unraveled. The following days were a blur of confusion, guilt, and longing for James. He moved through the motions of his routine, but everything felt wrong. The once cozy home was now a shell of its former self, filled with silence and reminders of Claire's absence. The laundry was neglected, meals became quick takeout dinners, and the children's questions grew more persistent. "Where's Mom, Dad?" Emma asked again one evening, her voice firm yet trembling. "When is she coming back?" James hesitated, avoiding her gaze. "She just needed some time," he repeated, though the words sounded hollow even to him. Deep down, he knew Claire's departure wasn't temporary. She had left because of him, because he had made her feel invisible. As guilt gnawed at him, James decided he couldn't sit idle any longer. That weekend, he drove to Claire's parents' house, hoping for answers. The drive felt agonizingly long, each mile a reminder of the emotional distance he had allowed to grow between them. When Claire's mother opened the door, her expression was a mix of surprise and disapproval. "She's not here," she said curtly, crossing her arms. James stepped forward, pleading, "Please, I just need to know if she's okay." Reluctantly, Claire's mother let him in. Over tea, she revealed the extent of Claire's struggles. "She called me so many times," her mother said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "She didn't want to leave you, James, but you didn't see what you had." She felt like a stranger in her own home. Her words hit James like a blow. He had known things weren't perfect, but he had never realized how deeply Claire had been hurting. "I thought I was doing enough," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I thought providing for the family was what mattered." Claire's mother shook her head. "Providing isn't just about money, James. It's about love, respect, and showing your family that they matter." James left the house that evening feeling more alone than ever. As he sat in his car, staring at the quiet suburban street, he realized he had no one to blame but himself. Desperate for a connection to Claire, James began sorting through her belongings, hoping to find some clue as to where she might have gone. One evening, as he rummaged through her closet, he found a small leather-bound journal tucked away in a box. Hesitating for a moment, he opened it, unsure if he had the right to invade her privacy. But the longing to understand her pain outweighed his reservations. The journal was a revelation. Page after page painted a vivid picture of Claire's life, her joys, her fears, and the deep sadness she had hidden so well. One entry stopped him cold. "Today, James called me useless again. I wonder if he even remembers the woman he married, the one who dreamed of building a life together. I miss feeling like his partner." Tears streamed down James's face as he read. Each entry was a mirror reflecting a version of himself he had refused to see. Dismissive, ungrateful, blind to the woman who had given everything for their family. Another entry read, "I tried to talk to him about how I felt today, but he brushed me off. He said I was overreacting. Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm just tired of being invisible." The journal was more than a collection of her thoughts. It was a testament to years of neglect and unspoken hurt. James realized how deeply Claire had suffered, how much she had sacrificed without ever feeling appreciated. That night, as he sat alone in their bedroom, James made a decision. He couldn't erase the past, but he could change the future. He began by taking on the tasks Claire had once managed effortlessly. From budgeting the household expenses to cooking meals for the kids, every task was a humbling reminder of her quiet strength. His first attempts were disastrous. He burned dinner more often than not and accidentally bought the wrong sizes for the children's clothes. But instead of giving up, he kept trying. Slowly, he began to learn the intricacies of managing a home, tasks he had once dismissed as easy or unimportant. James also sought help from a counselor, determined to understand the patterns of neglect that had led to Claire's departure. "I thought providing financially was enough," he admitted during one session. "But I see now how selfish I was. I didn't give her the love or respect she deserved." While cleaning the pantry one evening, James stumbled upon a note written in Claire's familiar handwriting. "Don't forget to use the cold cycle for delicates." It was such a simple reminder, yet it brought tears to his eyes. In the following days, he began finding more notes tucked in unexpected places. Under the couch cushions, taped to the refrigerator, inside the children's backpacks. Each one was a small piece of Claire's love, scattered like breadcrumbs through the life she had left behind. One note in particular stopped him in his tracks. "Remember to always encourage the kids. They're trying their best, even when it doesn't seem like it." James clutched the note tightly, his chest tightening as he realized the depth of Claire's care. She hadn't just been keeping the house running. She had been holding their entire family together with her quiet, unyielding love. James's life became a daily exercise in humility and growth. Each task Claire had managed so effortlessly now seemed monumental. Grocery shopping, for instance, was no longer a quick errand. He found himself wandering the aisles, staring at endless rows of brands, unsure of what the children liked or which produce was fresh. One evening, he burned an entire batch of pancakes, filling the kitchen with smoke. Lucas walked in, wrinkling his nose. "Mom's pancakes never looked like this," he said, laughing softly. James chuckled despite the sting of the comment. "She's a lot better at this than I am," he admitted, ruffling Lucas's hair. Beyond the household, James took strides to reconnect with his children. He began helping Emma with her science project, spending hours cutting cardboard and assembling diagrams at the kitchen table. With Lucas, he joined him in the backyard for soccer practice, despite not having played in years. These moments, while small, began to rebuild the bond he had let slip away. At first, the children were hesitant, unsure if this version of their father was here to stay. But over time, they began to trust the changes they saw. One evening, as James tucked Lucas into bed, the boy whispered, "I miss Mom, but I'm glad you're trying, Dad." Those words stayed with James, fueling his determination to become a better father and a better man. James also sought to understand his emotional shortcomings. Counseling sessions became a cornerstone of his transformation, allowing him to confront the dismissiveness and resentment he had harbored. It wasn't just the stress of work, he confessed during one session. "I was selfish. I thought providing money was enough. I didn't see her sacrifices." With every step, James began to reshape his understanding of what it meant to be a true partner. His newfound respect for Claire deepened as he realized the magnitude of her contributions, not just as a wife, but as the backbone of their family. Weeks turned into months, but Claire's absence left a void James couldn't ignore. Despite his progress at home, the house felt incomplete without her laughter, her presence, her guiding hand. The children missed her deeply, and their questions grew harder to answer. One evening, while organizing a box of old receipts, James discovered a train ticket tucked inside. It was for a small town a few hours away. The date stamped the day Claire had left. His heart raced as he clutched the ticket. Could she still be there? The next morning, James packed a bag and set off, driving through winding country roads with a mix of hope and fear. He rehearsed what he would say if he found her. "I was wrong. I see it now. I see you." When he arrived at the town's small train station, his hope faltered. He asked the station attendant and several locals if they had seen Claire, showing them a photo of her. Each response was the same. "Sorry, I haven't seen her." James spent the following weeks visiting shelters, libraries, and cafes in the area, showing Claire's photo to anyone who would look. The repeated dead ends wore on him, and despair began to creep in. One particularly discouraging day, James sat on a park bench, clutching Claire's photo. A homeless man sitting nearby noticed his distress and asked, "Looking for someone?" James nodded, explaining Claire's story. The man listened thoughtfully before offering words that stayed with James. "If she's running, it's not from you. It's towards something she needs. Maybe you should figure out what that is." Not long after, James received an unexpected call from one of Claire's old friends. "I saw her," the woman said cautiously. "She's volunteering at a women's shelter in the city. She looks happy, James. Don't go there unless you're ready to really listen to her." James's heart leapt at the news, but the caution in her friend's tone gave him pause. He spent the next few days preparing himself, knowing this encounter wasn't about convincing Claire to come home. It was about showing her he had changed. When James finally arrived at the shelter, he spotted Claire almost immediately. She was helping a young mother calm her crying baby, her face radiant with the warmth he hadn't seen in years. He hesitated, unsure if he should interrupt, but when Claire turned and their eyes met, the world seemed to freeze. Claire approached him slowly, her expression guarded. "What are you doing here, James?" she asked, her voice calm but distant. Taking a deep breath, James replied, "I came to say I'm sorry, not to ask you to come back, but to tell you that I finally see what I've done." As he poured out his heart, Claire listened silently, her face unreadable. When he finished, she handed him a sealed envelope. "Read this when you're ready," she said before walking away. That night, back in the quiet of his living room, James opened the letter with trembling hands. Claire's words cut deeper than he expected. "I didn't want to leave the life we built, but I couldn't stay and watch myself disappear. If you truly value me, don't come searching to fix things overnight. Show me you've changed, not with words, but with actions." James read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing the depth of her pain and the faint hope she still held. Claire wasn't closing the door completely. She was giving him a chance to prove himself. Determined to honor her request, James turned his focus inward. He continued to rebuild his relationship with Emma and Lucas, prioritizing their needs and making every effort to ensure they felt loved and heard. Slowly, the house began to feel alive again, filled with warmth and connection. Determined to honor Claire's words, James committed himself to proving that his transformation was real. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the small, consistent actions that rebuilt trust and showed his children, and potentially Claire, that he had truly changed. He started by making family dinners a priority. No more rushed takeout or eating alone in front of the TV. Instead, James prepared meals himself, often with Emma and Lucas helping in the kitchen. The process was messy. Flour dusted the counters, Lucas cracked eggshells into the batter, and Emma giggled as James struggled to dice onions without crying. But the laughter and shared effort brought a warmth back into the home that had been missing for too long. At the dinner table, James introduced a new tradition. Each family member would share the highs and lows of their day. Emma spoke about her school play rehearsals, and Lucas proudly shared his latest soccer achievements. James listened intently, offering words of encouragement and empathy, a far cry from his distracted responses in the past. The children, initially cautious, began to trust this new version of their father. One evening, Emma confided in him about a classmate who had been bullying her. "I didn't want to tell Mom before," she admitted, "because I didn't want to worry her. But now, I feel like I can talk to you." James's heart swelled with both pride and guilt. He hugged her tightly, whispering, "You can always talk to me, Emma. Always." His relationship with Lucas deepened, too. One weekend, James surprised him with a trip to a local soccer match. They cheered loudly from the stands, and James found himself genuinely enjoying the time with his son, something he hadn't prioritized before. The house began to feel more like a home, not because everything was perfect, but because it was filled with genuine connection and effort. Months passed, and James resisted the urge to contact Claire directly, respecting her request for space. Instead, he focused on becoming the father and man he should have been all along. Yet, he couldn't deny the hope that lingered, the hope that one day, Claire might see the changes he had made. One afternoon, as James was helping Lucas with his homework, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, he found Claire standing there, her expression calm but guarded. "I'd like to see the kids," she said simply. Emma and Lucas rushed to greet her, their excitement filling the air as they hugged her tightly. James stepped aside, giving them space, but his heart raced at the sight of her. For the first time in months, the house felt whole again. Over the next few weeks, Claire visited more frequently, each visit an opportunity to observe the changes in James. She noticed the small but significant shifts, the clutter-free kitchen, the laundry neatly folded, the way James listened to the children with genuine interest. One evening, as they cleaned up after dinner together, Claire finally asked, "Why now, James? Why couldn't you have been like this before?" James paused, setting down the dish he was drying. "Because I was blind," he admitted. "I thought providing for the family was enough. I didn't see how much you gave us, your time, your love, your sacrifices. Losing you opened my eyes. I don't want to go back to who I was." His honesty surprised her. It wasn't a rehearsed apology. It was real, raw, and heartfelt. Claire didn't respond immediately, but something in her softened. The walls she had built around her heart began to crack, though she wasn't ready to let them fall completely. Behind the scenes, Claire wrestled with her emotions. Seeing James's efforts had stirred something within her, a faint hope that things could be different. But years of pain and mistrust couldn't be undone overnight. She confided in a close friend from the shelter. "He's trying, and I can see that," Claire admitted. "But what if it's temporary? What if he reverts to the man who made me feel invisible?" Her friend placed a reassuring hand on hers. "It's okay to be cautious, Claire. Change takes time, and trust takes even longer. You're allowed to protect yourself while still leaving the door open." Meanwhile, Emma and Lucas began playing a subtle but significant role in reuniting their parents. Emma would excitedly share stories of how Dad had helped her with a school project, or how he had made breakfast that morning. Lucas, more direct, often said, "Dad's different now, Mom. He listens, and he's trying really hard." Their words planted seeds of hope in Claire's heart, reminding her of the family she had fought so hard to build. Claire's visits became more frequent, and one evening, she stayed for dinner. James prepared her favorite dish, roasted chicken with lemon and herbs, and the children buzzed with excitement at having their mom at the table again. As they ate, Claire couldn't help but notice how much had changed. James handled the children's arguments with patience, made an effort to include her in the conversation, and never once dominated the discussion as he had in the past. As she left that evening, she turned to James and said softly, "This was nice." "Thank you." James nodded, his voice sincere. "Thank you for coming. It means everything to us." To me. Over the next several months, Claire's visits became a regular part of their routine. At first, they were brief, just enough time for her to see the children and ensure they were doing well. But slowly, as she observed the genuine changes in James, her stays extended. She began helping Emma with her school projects or watching Lucas's soccer practice, often alongside James. One Sunday afternoon, as the family worked together to plant a small garden in the backyard, Claire noticed the ease with which James interacted with the children. His laughter came freely, his encouragement genuine. Watching him kneel in the dirt beside Lucas, explaining how to plant seedlings, Claire felt a flicker of the warmth she had once associated with their life together. But rebuilding trust wasn't just about the children. It was about addressing their own relationship. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Claire and James sat in the living room. The tension between them felt palpable, but neither could ignore the unspoken need for honesty. "I know I hurt you," James began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know I can't undo the years of neglect, but I need you to know that I see it all now. Everything you did, everything you sacrificed for this family. And I am so sorry, Claire. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you'll see that I've changed, not just for you, but for myself and the kids." Claire listened, her heart conflicted. "James, I can see that you're trying," she replied. "But trust doesn't come back overnight. For years, I felt like I was shouting into a void, trying to make you see me. It's not easy to forget that." "I don't want you to forget," James said. "I want you to see me as someone worth trusting again. And I'll do whatever it takes, for however long it takes." That night, as Claire left, her mind swirled with emotions. She wasn't ready to fully reconcile, But for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. A year after Claire had left, she made the decision to move back into the home, but with new boundaries and expectations. This time, their relationship was built on mutual respect, open communication, and shared responsibilities. James actively participated in parenting and household duties, ensuring that Claire no longer bore the weight of the family alone. The children thrived under the renewed sense of unity. Emma excelled in her school play, with both her parents cheering loudly in the audience, while Lucas's soccer team celebrated a championship win. Family dinners became moments of connection, filled with laughter, stories, and the occasional debate over dessert. One evening, as the family sat in the living room playing a board game, Emma turned to Claire and asked a question that silenced the room. "Mom, why did you leave us?" Claire hesitated, glancing at James, who nodded, silently encouraging her to answer honestly. "I left because I felt invisible," she said gently. "I needed to find myself again and show all of us that things had to change." Emma's brow furrowed. "And why did you come back?" Claire smiled softly, looking at James. "Because your dad worked hard to change. He showed me that our family was worth fighting for, and that I was worth fighting for." James added, "The most important lesson I've learned is to never take someone's efforts for granted. Everyone deserves to feel valued and loved." As the children hugged their parents tightly, Claire felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The journey had been painful, but it had brought them to a place of strength and understanding. Over time, Claire and James worked together to ensure their marriage remained a true partnership. They attended counseling sessions as a couple, learning to navigate their differences with empathy and patience. Claire also pursued her own interests, enrolling in art classes and volunteering at a local community center. One evening, as Claire painted by the window, James brought her a cup of tea. "You look happy," he said, watching her with admiration. "I am," Claire replied, setting down her brush. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I belong, to myself, to this family, to this life." James took her hand, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." Their story wasn't perfect, but it was real, a testament to the power of love, growth, and the resilience of the human spirit. Together, they reclaimed their future, not as the people they once were, but as the people they had become.